Welcome back. Now imagine this, you're drifting. Not quite asleep, not quite awake. Somewhere between the now and the never. In that quiet in between, there are rooms without windows. Shelves without end. Books without names. The air smells faintly of ash and oil. You hear the flutter of a page, turned by no hand. A few were hidden so well, they might still be out there, waiting. These are the libraries that shouldn't exist. The ones history tried to forget. Some were burned, others buried. Tonight we'll descend softly into their shadows, into forgotten knowledge, lost languages, and the men and women who paid dearly just to remember. We begin in Alexandria. The year is somewhere between 250 and 200 BCE. Not a poet, not a statesman. You're something more invisible. A scribe. You're in Alexandria, not the beachside, sun-kissed fantasy painted by postcards, but the city as it once was. It isn't one building, but a complex. A labyrinth of chambers and colonnades where scrolls line the walls like snakes coiled to strike. One may have been written by a mad Babylonian who claimed to hear the stars whisper. A tangled mass of limestone and marble, where the scent of papyrus paste clings to the walls and the seagulls scream like oracles. That the Ptolemies themselves hide dangerous texts, forbidden magic, subversive philosophies, behind locked doors no one speaks of aloud. The scratching of reeds on parchment is constant, 1,000 tiny claws etching memory into fiber. Sometimes older tongues forgotten by all but the ink. A book being opened and no one there to read it. You're not a philosopher. Each morning, before the sun warms the stone underfoot, you shuffle into the heart of the Library of Alexandria, or, more precisely, the Mauseon, the Temple of the Muses. The floors are cold, the candles drip constantly, and there's no silence. You sit hours on end copying texts in languages you do not speak, sometimes Greek, sometimes Phoenician. There are rules. You do not embellish. You do not interpret. Every ship that docks in Alexandria is searched. Every text confiscated, copied, sometimes never returned. You copy. One mistake and you destroy a lineage. One smudge and meaning vanishes forever. Knowledge lives or dies in your ink-stained fingers. You're hungry. The bread is stale, the water warm. Your eyes burn, and still you write. Because this isn't just about books. The library is a machine. A collector of every scroll in the world. You learn quickly, this is not about sharing knowledge. It's about owning it. And still, the work continues. New scrolls arrive daily. Some are moldy. Others are rumored to be cursed. You copy it anyway. There are whispers in the halls that scrolls have gone missing, that rival scribes hoard rare works in secret chambers. Sometimes, when you're alone and the oil lamp gutters low, you think you hear the rustle of pages from behind the walls. And outside, riots, fires, conquerors passing through like storms. The library is a fortress of fragile things in a violent world. And still you copy, because what else is there to do but remember? Imagine the scent first. Beeswax, mold, and a little smoke from the hearth fire. You're barefoot on damp stone, cloaked in wool that never quite dries. Somewhere deep in a monastery, high in the Pyrenees, a bell tolls so softly it feels like part of your heartbeat. The year is 1320. The Inquisition is tightening its grip. And you are a monk. A keeper of things you're not supposed to have. A brother of silence and simplicity. But also, your days are predictable. Matins before sunrise, then prayer and breakfast. A small crust of bread, a thin broth. Beyond a false wall in the wine cellar, there is another room. You scrape frost off your desk in the scriptorium before you begin your work. A slow, rhythmic dance of ink and quill. Not mentioned to guests, a room that should not exist. But your nights, that's when the real work begins. Because beneath the chapel, behind the apothecary shelves, not on any blueprint. You speak little of it. There are rules. No names, no questions, no pride. In that space, there are books, not psalters. Not liturgical texts. No, these are older, rarer. Some written in Greek, others in Arabic. A single sentence, the wrong sentence, can mean execution. One is bound in red leather and smells like smoke. Another has no title at all, only symbols that crawl like insects across the cover. You and your brothers call it Scriptorum Occultum, the hidden library. It began innocently enough. A few works of Aristotle banned by the bishop, a medical text from Salerno deemed heretical. But soon it became something more. He mentions a name, a scribe who once stayed here, a man who vanished, a refuge, a resistance, a quiet rebellion. You take turns copying pages in secret, using soot and egg whites, binding them with scraps of old vestments. The ashes rise like prayers into the darkness. Each book saved feels like a prayer whispered in defiance. Outside the monastery walls, the world burns. The Inquisition hunts ideas now. Words are weapons. Entire libraries are being cataloged, censored, or destroyed. Someone must carry the fire in the margins of the world, a fragment of Plato pressed into the pages of a hymnal. And so the monks adapt. Hollowed-out choir books hide treatises on astronomy. Scrolls are disguised within candle molds. Each act of preservation is a risk, and the risks are rising. A visitor arrives, a Dominican with clean boots and too many questions. He asks about your abbey's holdings, about foreign influences. You say you've never heard of him. That night, you burn 2 texts in the courtyard, not because you want to, but because they are too precious to fall into the wrong hands. You go back to the hidden room, light a small candle, open a worn book, and copy. Always copy. Because you don't know which words will survive the century. You only know that someone must remember them. And if that means hiding, pretending, or even dying, so be it. A fortress perched high above a valley, carved into the rock like a watchful god. Its walls are white and severe, and from a distance it looks peaceful, like a monastery in the mountains. But this is not a place of peace. This place is Alamut, and if the legends are true, somewhere deep in its stone belly, beneath the armories, the training halls, and the gardens of pomegranate and mint, there once existed a book not spoken of in polite company, a book said to hold names of angels and poisons alike, a book that whispered rather than spoke. Some claim it was made of paper soaked in opium, or stitched with sinew from a man who once betrayed the order. They called it the Black Book of Alamut. No one agrees on what it looked like. Some say it was bound in black silk, others say hammered bronze. Whatever its form, it was never meant for public eyes. It belonged, they say, to the Hashashin, the assassins of Persia. Part religious sect, part military elite, part philosophical mystery. They were feared across the Islamic world and beyond. The Nizari Ismailis, as they were properly known, operated from this mountain stronghold from the 11th to the 13th century. They used patience, and they used secrets. Others claim it contained mystical knowledge, sigils to cloud the mind, words to open spiritual gates. A few insist it was a book of pure politics, coded instructions for shifting alliances, blackmail, and disinformation. They used no armies, they fought no wars, and not all power should be shared. A man of brilliance and terror who carved out a kingdom not with armies, but with fear, control, and a terrifying discipline. And yet kings, caliphs, and crusaders feared them because they used precision. Now return your mind to that book. What was inside? Some say it was a manual of death, a guide to poisons, blade placement, and misdirection, and a smaller few. They whisper that it could predict the fall of empires. It's not clear who wrote it. Perhaps it was compiled by Hassan I Sabah himself, the charismatic founder of the order, the old man of the mountain, that it was passed from master to apprentice, each adding their own chapter, crossing out another's, that its power lay not in permanence, but in adaptation. He believed knowledge was power. According to fragments found centuries later, the book contained not even the European travelers who searched the ruins for secrets to bring home. They broke the stones. They desecrated every trace of the assassin's reign, rituals for spiritual detachment to unmoor the mind from worldly bonds, botanical sketches of rare mountain herbs, some of which modern science still cannot identify, phrases in multiple languages, Arabic, Persian, Syriac, even Greek, and scattered curious notations, some resembling mathematical riddles, others like prayers, and a few written backward, as if meant to be hidden from casual eyes. One traveler, an Andalusian scholar who claimed to have seen it, said simply, "I do not know what I read, but it changed the shape of my dreams," or hidden in plain sight, passed from hand to hand by people who no longer speak of the order, but still follow its quiet pulse. Another theory, that the Black Book wasn't a book at all, but a collection of memories, written, erased, rewritten, always shifting, and that's why it could never be copied, only inherited. When the Mongols finally sacked Alamut in 1256, they burned the libraries, but no one ever found the Black Book, not even the Ilkhanate scribes who carted away thousands of pages for their imperial archive. Gone, vanished, or perhaps simply waiting beneath a different name on a shelf no one checks, in a collection long mislabeled, because some books were never meant to be known, only remembered. Imagine a building not grand like a palace, nor sacred like a temple. Its walls are bare, its windows few, and inside shelves, endless shelves, scrolls tied with ribbon, ledgers bound in cracked leather, lists, letters, inventories, receipts, instructions, complaints. No treasure, no thrones, no chanting monks or whispering spies, just paper. Thousands upon thousands of pages. This was the engine of the Persian Empire, not the armies, not the satraps, but the archive. The Achaemenid Empire, stretching from the Aegean to the Indus, understood something most empires take centuries to learn. Power is paperwork. To govern such a vast stretch of land and people, they needed records. And so they built a system, an entire world of scribes, clerks, messengers, and archivists. They cataloged taxes, grain shipments, horse distributions, temple maintenance. Their words did not stir revolutions. Over 30,000 clay tablets and fragments, inscribed in Elamite, Babylonian, Aramaic, and Old Persian. But they held the empire together. You filed reports, monthly, then quarterly, noting how many soldiers you maintained, how many bushels of wheat were harvested, whether local temples were behaving. Take, for instance, the Persepolis fortification tablets discovered in the 1930s beneath the ancient ceremonial capital of Persepolis. Their contents? Mostly dull, painfully so. 3 measures of barley delivered to the temple goatherd, 5 workers transferred from Susa to Ecbatana. It was a mirror. It reflected your worth to the empire, that they began writing reports no one requested, inventing fictitious officials, logging phantom transactions, a repair request for a broken cart axle. But this is the quiet magic of history. The unremarkable becomes revealing. From these clay fragments, we learn about supply chains that stretched for hundreds of miles, about how labor was paid, sometimes in food, sometimes in silver, about administrative divisions, calendar systems, even dietary restrictions. This was not chaos, it was coordination, a pair of eyes behind the seal. And coordination requires surveillance. A figure who received copies of all reports, but whose name never appeared in return. Every piece of information a way to monitor, to discipline, decisions delayed. administrators paralyzed by caution, paperwork devouring initiative. To assess loyalty, imagine being a provincial governor in Media. You received orders from Persepolis sealed with the imperial signet. Even the British, centuries later, would marvel at how much the Persians tracked. Receipts for spies, logs of bribes, inventories of silence, and all of it archived. Your success was not measured by heroism, it was measured by your paperwork. If you fell behind, you were noticed. If your numbers didn't add up, you were investigated. If your ink dried too often, someone came looking. The Persian archive was not just a library, and it did not forget. There are whispers, barely more than echoes, that some scribes went mad. Why? Let the shelves gather dust. Perhaps to cover their tracks. Perhaps because they believed they were being watched. Or perhaps because they were. There is a tablet, never officially catalogued, that references a shadow scribe. An auditor no one met. Was it real? Was it metaphor? Even in stone, paranoia can seep. Later empires borrowed the same machinery. The Abbasids, the Ottomans. And here's the irony. What brought the Persian Empire down was not a failure of records. It was an excess of them. The weight of their own bureaucracy became crushing. As Alexander the Great swept across their lands, many cities surrendered not because they were conquered, but because the chain of command had frozen in its own rituals. They had become prisoners of their own archive. And yet, somewhere in Iran, perhaps beneath a government building, perhaps under a farmer's field, more tablets remain, unread, undisturbed, buried memories of how an empire once thought. An empire that believed more than anything else. If it could be written, it could be controlled. And now, let the ink fade. Let us gently return to the surface. You've wandered through libraries that weren't supposed to survive. You've met scribes who copied in darkness, monks who risk everything to preserve truth, assassins who may have written spells in blood, emperors who ruled with silence and receipts. That strange sensation that somewhere, in the forgotten margins of the world, something waits to be read. And maybe, just maybe, you've felt the quiet pull of the pages, but not tonight. Tonight, the books close, the dust settles, and the stories, real or imagined, can rest once more where they belong, between the lines, between the shelves, between waking and sleep. Good night, and until next time.